quality of your life depends on your knowledge. Your knowledge of God will determine the quality of your life. And there's no knowledge of God without His Word. So your knowledge of God depends on your knowledge of His Word, because God and His Word are one. His Word is His revelation. You know, there are things we don't know are important, because sometimes there are those who tell us they're not important, but that also tells us why the quality of their life is where it is. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 24. Who his own self bare our sins in his own body on the tree, that we, being dead to sins, should live unto righteousness, by whose stripes. Say it again. Turn to chapter 1. Have you forgotten that Peter was the apostle to the circumcision? That means to the Jews. And when the persecution broke out, they ran out of the place and were scattered all over the realm. So he particularly addressed his message to Jewish Christians. Do you get that now? That's why he called them strangers scattered abroad, because they went out. They're strangers in those lands. They've gone out of Israel. You see, he wasn't writing to every Christian. He was writing to Jewish Christians. He felt a responsibility toward them. When you hold that in your mind, you think of this scripture. Let's go back to 1 Peter chapter 2, and we will take it from the 21st verse so that we can put it in perspective. For even hereunto were ye called, because Christ also suffered for us, leaving us an example that ye should follow his steps, who did no sin, neither was guile found in his mouth, who when he was reviled not again, when he suffered, he threatened not, but committed himself to him that judgeth righteously, who his own self bare our sins in his own body on the tree, that we being dead to sins should live unto righteousness, by whose stripes ye were healed. Then he goes, for ye were as sheep going astray, but are now returned unto the shepherd and bishop of your souls. Wow. By whose stripes, he says, you were healed. Great. Now, this is one of the scriptures that we use all around the world to claim our healing. In reality, it's wrong. But you know, we can't tell too many people that, because they're going to wait till the rapture to change it. And I'm not asking anybody to change it, but I'm trying to let you know that the mentality, your knowledge or lack of knowledge, will determine the quality of your life. Healing here, he says, by whose stripes ye were healed. And the accurate teaching, the church has a beautiful teaching on it. I do, but there's more. There's more to it. And that teaching is about Isaiah seeing it ahead and saying, by whose stripes ye are healed. And then it happens, and then Peter looks back at the cross and says, by whose stripes you were healed. But here's what I want to tell you. He was talking to the Jews. He wasn't talking to every Christian. And at this moment in time, Peter hadn't come to completely grasp the gospel of Jesus Christ. You say, Peter, the Pope? Yes. In his second epistle, for the first time, he uses the same term that Paul used in the knowledge of God. Throughout the first epistle, he never used the term epignosis. The accurate accurate and full knowledge of Christ. He never used it. He used it first time in his second epistle. And at the conclusion of his second epistle, he mentions that there are things in the writings of Paul. He called the writings of Paul scripture. And he said there are things in the writings of Paul, particularly referring to the end of time, where he says Paul had written things that are difficult to understand. So many of the unlearned rest. Now, what am I trying to say about that? Just to tell you, Revelation is progressive. And at this time, he was addressing the Jews. He hadn't brought the rest of them in. And the church at this time hadn't come to completely understand the works of Christ. All that he came to do. If you want to understand this, you go into the book of Acts. And you find that the first 15 chapters of the book of Acts, you're dealing with a baby church. So much they didn't know. So much they didn't understand. They even almost persecuted Peter for going into the house of Cornelius, the Roman centurion. And even when Peter went to the Gentile Christians and ate with them, and James sent others, James was the pastor of Jewish church in Jerusalem. When the messengers of James, pastor of the Jewish church, came, and Peter saw them while he was eating with Gentile Christians, he quickly stopped and washed his hands. He didn't want them to find him eating with them because he remembered what happened after he went to the house of Cornelius. They almost suspended him, excommunicated him. They said, you went into the house of the uncircumcised. He had to plead his case. They said, the Spirit bade me go. He had to explain his revelation, the vision that he had. And they gave him last warning. So when he showed up in a Gentile home and he was eating there and saw James' disciples, immediately he stopped. But Paul was there. And Paul said, he said to Peter, this is wrong. And he preached a message to him. You can read all of this in Galatians chapter 1 and into chapter 2. He reprimanded him. He said, what you've done is wrong. So you can understand the kind of revelation that the man had. Where did the church begin? At the cross? Before the cross? After the cross? Where? Y'all don't look at me like that. Come on, tell me something. You know the answer. Where was it? After the cross. Yes. After the cross. By whose stripes you were healed. There was no church. So who were those that were healed by his stripes? The Jews. They were the ones under the covenant. The covenant of healing was for the Jewish church, the Old Testament church. Okay? That they had the covenant of healing. And so at the cross, he saved them. At the cross, he redeemed them. At the cross, the stripes, the church has, Bible scholars will tell you there are two thinkings they've got about this interpretation of the stripes. Because on the one hand, a school of thought says that the stripes refer to these beatings that he had from the Romans. And they even go on to tell us that the Romans gave 39 stripes. Okay? And referring to what Paul says, 40 stripes received I, save one. And that is very controversial, because did he mean that he received 40 stripes except on one occasion, where he was given more or less? Or did he mean that he received 39 stripes, meaning 40 stripes minus one? That is controversial. Different translations will say different things. Okay, so the church, a school of thought holds to that it's got to do with these stripes. And I remember years ago, they thought that there were 39 major diseases. But since then, we found out more. Okay. So that's one school of thought. The other school of thought goes into the book of Isaiah, and they say, well, the stripe really is one death-dealing blow. It doesn't really say stripes in the plural. It says stripe, which means one death-dealing blow. And it doesn't mean the whip. It means a crushing blow on him, meaning that God condemned him and killed him. Again, it does make a lot of spiritual sense. And because he says that God killed him. See, before man could kill him, God had to kill him. So the Bible shows us, when you read in Isaiah chapter 53, read verses 8, 9, and 10, you'd find that he tells us that Jesus died two deaths. Which means, because he uses the word death in plural, it definitely refers to a plurality of deaths. And according to the Bible, there are 3 deaths. And he couldn't have died the last one at that time. The first death is the spiritual death, which is separation from God. The second one is the physical death. The third one is the second death, which is in a lake of fire and brimstone. Are you getting this?